Hi everyone, this is Sanjana from Mockat, and today I'll take you through the strategy that I used to get a 99.98 percentile in XAT and a 99.998 on the verbal section. Primarily, we'll focus on the overall exam, and after that, I'll also give you another alternate strategy that you can apply. So try out both of these, try out a bunch of mocks. XAT is an exam that if you're cracking, you have the potential to get into XLRI, which is definitely one of the top B schools, as well as many other B schools that accept your XAT percentile. So let's understand a little bit about the XAT exam before we look at the strategy. So the exam has 76 questions, which is split into 26 for verbal, 22 for decision making, and 28 for quant and DI. Now we're going to get about 3 hours, and unlike CAT, there's no sectional timer. So you can move around in between sections. You could look to solve some questions in verbal, then a couple in quant, and then come back. Whatever you want, you can do in this 2 hours and 55 minutes that we'll typically get. The other benefit of this is you can also look to prioritize your stronger section. Make sure that you're attempting all the questions there with a lot of focus and maximize your score. Or you could also look to finish your stronger section a little quickly and spend more time on your weaker sections so that you can solve as many questions as possible overall. And I'll talk about both of these approaches. Now, another unique thing in XAT is out of these 76 questions, we can leave a max of 8 questions unattempted. It's not that you can't leave questions unattempted, but if you're leaving more than 8 questions unattempted, typically there's a penalty and it's usually been 0.1 marks. So if you're leaving up to 8 questions unattempted, that is, you're solving 68 questions, that's fine. But the moment you make it, say you've left 10 questions unattempted, then you're getting minus 0.1 for the 9th and the 10th question. So that's a minus 0.2. And it's something, if you see from a timing perspective, we're getting almost 3 hours for 76 questions. Whereas in CAT, we got 2 hours for 66 questions. Or, I like to give this example. In SNAP, we are getting 60 minutes for 60 questions itself. So time is usually not an issue if you have prepared well. Now, another thing which, I've sometimes seen students stress about, oh, XAT is like super difficult. There's GK in it. What do? I haven't been reading the news. Now, the great thing is the XAT percentile is only a combination of your verbal, your DM and your quant DI. And you're going to be getting sectional percentiles as well for each of these sections. Your GK scores are not part of your XAT percentile. To the best of my knowledge, it's only XLRI or Xavier School of Management as it's called now, where they get your GK scores and your essay scores. And, it's not even something which they separately consider in the sense that while you have your XAT percentile, which is considered for you being shortlisted and for you being selected, of course, you have your interview, other parameters. There's no separate parameter for the GK and the essay. So typically where this can come up is in an interview. So if they, they'll have access to your GK scores, they'll have access to your essay. If they choose to, they could ask you certain questions around it, or, if they feel that your GK score is on the lower side, they could ask you maybe a few questions. So I'll also be talking a little bit more about the GK section and how to attempt it. But now let's jump into what is my strategy to get a 99.98 in XAT. Now, what I did was I started with the verbal section. That's my strong section. I made sure I'm solving everything. I'm usually a fast reader, but I made sure that, I'm reading everything. I'm maximizing the score. I'm not making any silly mistakes and trying to get as high a score as possible here. Now, after that, since I'd been doing a fair amount of reading, there are RCs, inference questions, and so on, what I did was I spent about 10 minutes in solving a few quant questions. So I just went through the first few quant questions, maybe 4 or 5. Whichever ones I could solve, I decided to solve. That was more of a refresher. Quite frankly, given that, the exam is about 3 hours, you can actually look to even take like a break of a minute. You can just, drink some water if the center allows you, or, you can even, there have been exams where I've actually put down my head and rested as well, right? Because we have time here. Or another alternative is you can do something like this. And then I went to the DM section. DM is a section where what I recommend is solve the questions and look to finish it off, right? You're reading a case, you understand what it is. We'll be having videos on the DM section, so I'm not going into the solving methodology now. Definitely subscribe if you want to know more about how to ace the DM section. Vignesh will be putting up some videos. But coming back to this, DM is a section where you can unnecessarily end up spending a lot of time because, you're torn between options. Sometimes the options are about prioritizing certain factors. So we're like, okay, should one be the best, or is, 4 the best, and things like that. We can waste a lot of time. So what I recommend here is that, you take up the section one shot, you look to finish it, read the question with focus, use the question to help you answer, and, certain parameters which we'll talk about in the DM videos. And then what you do is you mark that question and you move on. What you could do in between cases is, you can look to take a very short break. You can solve one quant question, or if you are starting with quant, then, you could solve a verbal question or something like that, and, you can come back. But don't look to overstretch the DM section. Finish it off. And then the next thing which I did was quant, which is my weaker section because, I don't coach for it. I've forgotten most of the formulae. So here again, I split it into two parts. First is all of the doable questions, by which I mean the easy and the medium questions, and especially the questions which I could quickly solve, whether it was in the quant or the DI bit. I did those. Any questions which I felt that, it's going to be calculation intensive, that of course doesn't have a calci, or if it's something which, I really need to think and solve, I just mark those questions for review, right? And needless to say, of course, anywhere I've completely forgotten the formula and all of that. So left those. And then in the second pass, came back and did all the mark for review questions. I mean, I've put about 15 minutes here. To be honest, I finished it a little bit earlier and I did have some time left at the end, right? And that's something which should show you that, yeah, that this is an exam which you can actually definitely look to finish all of the questions, right? Now, the extra time which I had, what I did was I just went through all of my, verbal questions and I reviewed all of the solutions. There were certain questions where I was torn between a couple of options. So I would, reread the paragraph or reread the RC and just think through if my answer is correct or not. Usually I don't recommend this much, but I did have the extra time. So I decided to take advantage of it. Now, if you're curious why I don't recommend it, if you have time and, you can give a fresh read, whether it is for verbal or for DM, it is fine. But if you are not able to read the paragraph or the RC and, you're just looking at the question, it's not going to be fresh in your memory. So changing it then might not help. If at all you do this, please do it only after you have finished at least the entire paper or you've left a max of 8 questions unattempted. So to summarize this approach, which is the first approach, you start with your strong section. Depending on the section and depending on your reading speed, you can take anywhere from 40 to 60 minutes, right? So if it's DM, for example, if your reading speed is good, you can wrap it up early. Quant might take a little more time. Number of questions are also more. Whichever it is, start with your strong section. Try to maximize your marks there, right? Then you can look to solve decision making. And again, don't deter too much. Read the question with focus, get what you can, solve it. If needed, you could look at another section in between or just take like a 30-second, 1-minute break in between also, because you're moving through cases. Different cases, you'll need to have like a different sort of strategy. So you can always take a little bit of a mental break. This exam will allow you to do that. Last thing, your weaker section, right? Again, you can look to maximize the time spent here, try to solve as many questions as possible. You could split it into 2 passes, the way I said, the easier ones as well as the mark for review if it is quant. In case if verbal is your weaker section, what I would recommend is, maybe you can look to quickly start with the grammar, the fill in the blanks questions and all. These questions will take less time and then you can move on to, the inference, the RC, the poem, so things like that. If poem is not your forte, for example, you can just leave it to the very end. Just mark those questions for review so that you definitely come back to it. Keep a track of the question paper palette so that you know how many questions you have left unattempted. Now, whatever time you have left, either review your marked for review questions, try to solve as many as you can, or if you feel that you haven't done well in some section, right? So say verbal, I was not able to solve many questions. Maybe I can go back and I can look at an RC with, fresh eyes, or quant, I feel I've not done enough. There are a few more questions that I could let me just retry it. Maybe I'll get it this time. So if you feel that, there's a section where you can do better, then you could also look through all the unattempted questions or the mark for review questions in that section. So that would be the first approach. Just make sure, just reminding you again, don't leave more than 8 questions unattempted. If you do the math, you'll find that, probability does favor if you just mark unattempted questions, say a BBB or a CCC, something like that. Don't do it with the hope to get a lot of questions. Ideally, over this next month, put in the prep so that you're able to solve as many questions as possible. But, why get the minus 0.1 if at all it is there? Now, the next approach, this is also something that you can try out in mock. See whichever works better for you and you can use that. Here, what I'd recommend is you start with the decision-making section, right? Look to finish it. Same way as I mentioned, can take little breaks or solve a quant question or a grammar question here and there in between if needed. But finish it off. Don't deter too much. if you feel this is the answer, just mark it. Somewhere if you absolutely feel that, yes, I think this is something which I'm not getting, just leave it, and later you can come back to it. Generally, the cutoffs for decision making are not super high. So if you leave a couple of questions here and there, nothing's going to happen. Next, you follow it up with your strong section, depending on whether it's verbal or quant, and what's your reading speed like, what's your solving speed like. Spend a good deal of time and try to maximize the number of questions that you are solving here, right? And then you follow it up with your weaker section, right? Again, here, try to do it in 2 passes. So this could be something like, if verbal is your weaker section and your reading speed is a little bit on the slower side, you can solve all the grammar questions, fill in the blanks, the inference questions and all, and then you do the RCs. Again, there you start with some of the easier RCs and then you go to the tougher ones, something like that. If quant is your weaker section, you can do it in 2 passes, the way I recommended, where you're doing all the doable questions first and marking the remaining for review, whichever you feel you can do but it'll take time, and do those in your second pass. This way you are maximizing the number of questions that you're solving and the marks that you're getting. And then in whatever time that you have left, either you review your mark for review questions, or if you need to go back to a section, you do that. Now, going back to a section could also be going back to your strong section, because maybe in 45 minutes or 60 minutes, whatever time you took, maybe there were still some questions which you have left. Maybe you've not done an RC, right? So you could go back and do it. Or if it is quant, you feel that there were some questions which you left simply because it would take a lot of time. You've marked those for review, so you can go back to that also. So whichever section needs more time can be your stronger or your weaker section. Or if you had a few in decision making which you weren't able to figure out, and you feel that yes, the quant DI and the verbal is done, you can devote more time to the DM also. Now coming to the next part, where typically we will get 25 to 30 minutes. There'll usually be like a 5-minute break where we also do keyboard testing after the main XAT exam, and then you have your GK and essay. Now, over the last few years, GK and essay has been a combined time, right? So you don't get separate time, which means that you need to manage your time well. You can't spend too much time on your essay or too much time on your GK either. What I would recommend is just start with the GK. Depending on your reading speed, your knowledge, look to finish it in somewhere around 10 to 15 minutes if we are getting about 25 minutes. Make sure to mark all answers. There's been no negative marking in GK. Read the question paper. Make sure there's no negative marking this year as well. And then what you do is just mark all the answers. If you're torn between 2 options, just go with one, or otherwise, again, just go with a BBB or a CCC, something like that. Right. Typically for the essay, we do get a couple of topics. One topic is a little bit on the easier side. It's usually a little more common. Most people will know about it. What I would recommend in choosing which topic you're going for, don't spend too much time thinking and double checking and all of that. What you know about, or even if you don't know too much about, can you use logic over there when you are maybe analyzing it or giving a particular view? I do have a video on how to write a good essay, so I will link that as well. But what you can definitely do is have a short intro, have your key points, have a very short conclusion at the end. It could even be just one sentence, so that you are meeting the word limit. The word limit is usually pretty short, right? So just make sure to structure your writing. That itself adds a lot in terms of the marks that you can expect. What you prep for this? The Mockat news is something which can help you for the GK as well as for the essay. Static GK is again something, and from a practice perspective, you can pick up the last 10 years essay topics and you could use that to get an idea. Generally, there's been a little bit of a current affairs political theme which has been there. So again, knowing what has happened this year in terms of things around the UN, around climate change, around, let's say, what's happening in Israel or Russia, things like these, things related to oil, these are good topics to definitely read up on. If you're in the habit of reading the news, generally one of the topics should be addressable. There have also been topics which have come out around business, around things like capitalism and socialism, things like that. And sometimes you can even expect an abstract topic, right? So easiest thing to do would be look at the last few years essay topics and you can prepare. However, definitely remember, this neither GK nor essay is part of your XAT percentile. Do prioritize your actual XAT prep rather than this one, right? This should be a second priority. Now, this is something I've covered before. I'm just recapitulating it so that you put in the prep for that, because this is a great exam, right? This can help you get through XLRI as well as many other top B schools. We will get more time. There's no sectional timer. So this exam is really good, especially for those of you where you're putting in the prep, you've put in prep for CAT, you're just preparing the extra sections, DM, and a little bit extra. Again, I linked the video where I've gone in depth into the XAT topics for you, so you can go through that and you can look to prepare for those, right? It's also great for any of you where you feel that you're not very fast at reading, or you tend to stress, because in this exam the stress is generally a lot lower than say a CAT exam where you have 40 minutes and you cannot skip between sections and things like that, right? The other thing is, if you're a little bit weaker on the quant, or you found the DILR tough, here we have quant and DI combined, so you can go for whichever questions seem doable to you, so that you're meeting the sectional cutoff. And lastly, number of people who take XAT are on the lower side, right? One, number of registrants themselves are lower. CAT, of course, is higher. Second, typically, if people have done well in CAT, a lot of them don't turn up for the exam, or they would have just done half-hearted prep. So if you are preparing for the next 4 to 5 weeks, you're preparing the topics, you're taking the mocks, you're giving it your best shot, you definitely have a very good B school. In fact, multiple very good B schools to look forward to from a shortlisting perspective. And XLRI, they only look at your XAT percentile, they don't look at profile. So in case if you feel that there's any weaknesses there in terms of marks or something else, again, a very good exam to take. So stay tuned, definitely subscribe. We'll be coming up with a lot more videos about XAT, about other exams, about interviews, and all the best.